This is Truth Jihad Radio. I'm your host, Kevin Barrett. Got a great show coming up today. First, our guest, Christopher Bolin, is really, I think, that maybe the best, most important freelance journalist who jumped on the 9/11 inside job story early on and didn't let go, even after he was more or less hounded out of the country, and that's a whole story in itself. He's still out there trying to get the truth out, including the sides of the truth that a lot of the 9/11 truth movement is afraid of looking at, which is the involvement of the Zionist cartel and the Israeli Mossad. Big taboo, but we don't have any taboos here at American Freedom Radio. We just want to know the truth, whatever it may be. And so, hey, let's welcome Christopher Bolin. Welcome, Chris. How are you?
Hello, Kevin. Good to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. Boy, you're still doing good work on 9/11, and you've turned your attention now to one of the key questions, which is how in the world could they blow up these 3 skyscrapers in New York on 9/11 in a very complex false flag operation and plan to get away with it by not allowing any honest investigators to take a hard look at the forensic evidence?
Right. The conclusive chapter of my book that I'm working on is about the destruction of the steel, because in an attack like this, in an event like this, you have to destroy the evidence. Just like in Oklahoma City, after the federal building was blown up, they buried the evidence to keep it away from the investigators. And in the case of 9/11, with the exotic explosives like nanothermite that were used to pulverize the building and to bring down the steel structure, they had to destroy the steel in a secure way and send it to Asia where it was melted down.
Right, and a lot of people know that the basics of that story in David Ray Griffin's The New Pearl Harbor, which was kind of the first real comprehensive look at a lot of 9/11 evidence that brought in a lot of new people into this movement. He talks about how Fire Engineering magazine was editorializing the destruction of the evidence must stop as early as fall 2001, and it didn't stop. They just kept on shipping the steel overseas to be melted down and recycled. So how in the world could they have had that all set up?
That's very good. Excellent question. The thing is that the person who was responsible for the cleanup at the World Trade Center was the former commissioner of the Department of Design and Construction for New York City. His name is Kenneth R. Holden, and he's the man who built the mayor's Office of Emergency Management. He's the person who oversaw the cleanup from A to Z, and he went in front of the 911 Commission on April 1st, 2003, and told the Commission that he had been given a verbal agreement, he had been given a verbal green light to send the steel to 2 scrap metal yards in New Jersey. Those 2 scrap metal yards were Hugo Noy, Noy is spelled N-E-U, and the other one was Metal Management. These companies have since merged, and but the Hugo Noy company was the biggest company, and that company is run by Jonathan Noy. That company sent hundreds of thousands of tons of steel to China to be melted down.
And that's just outrageous. Whenever a big disaster, especially an unprecedented disaster, happens, including airline crashes, of course, they always want to grab all of the forensic evidence, all of the pieces of whatever fell apart, and do a complete, careful forensic reconstruction of what happened.
Right.
And here, it looks like they just got rid of all this stuff as quickly as possible.
Exactly. The New York Times, when I started working on this story, I called up to the metal companies involved, and they didn't want to talk about it. Their spokesperson's name is Daniel Stretche. He said, "We're very proud of the work we did in recycling the steel, but I couldn't speak to any of the people involved. They even though I had contact with some of them through email and things, they refused to answer any of the questions about the destruction of the steel." And what happened is that right away they began taking the steel on some barges, and it was ferried over to Brooklyn, where it was transferred to other barges and then taken to one of these 2 yards in New Jersey. And what's interesting is that Hugo Noy shipyard, the Hugo Noy scrapyard, just before 9/11, through an agreement with the government of New York City, they had dredged the canal, the channel that goes to their yard, so that they could have deeper draft ships going longer distances, carrying more steel. So they had prepared the scrapyard for exactly the kind of mission that they had. I mean, they received lots and lots of steel, huge amounts of steel, and they had to get rid of it, and they sent it to China. Now, what's interesting is that there was a network already established at Huguenot to sell the steel abroad. You see, it would make most sense, you would think, in terms of logistics, to sell the steel to scrapyards in the United States, like steel melters in Pennsylvania or Indiana. Instead, this steel was cut up immediately into pieces about 5 or 6 feet long. Already in September, the pieces were cut up and then sold and sent to China. And this was done through a Huguenot trading desk, a network that was created already in the early part of 1999. And this desk was headed by two men, Yehuda Sar and Nathan Fruchter. And these two guys are Orthodox Jewish people who worked for Mark Rich of Glencore. Mark Rich, the big trader, the Iranian oil trader, the guy who Clinton pardoned on his last day in office.
Right. He's kind of a allegedly, mob and Mossad connected zillionaire who is so well connected that he more or less could call in the favor from the President of the United States and get himself pardoned.
Exactly. Well, about his allegations of being Mossad connected, there's no allegations here. The man that runs the Rich Fund in Israel, where he sends a lot of money, his name is Avner Azoulay. Avner Azoulay is a former Mossad, high-level Mossad chief. He wasn't the director of the Mossad, but he's very high level. He's the guy that runs the Mark Rich Foundation in Israel, which is,
wow.
And Mark Rich is an Israeli citizen. So, wow. And these two guys, go ahead.
No, yeah, it's just so unbelievable that this kind of high-level organized crime operation basing itself in Israel, where they have no extradition, is able
right.
to call in a president and say, pardon this top organized crime figure, and boom, he gets the pardon.
Right. Well, there was a lot of money exchanged. Denise Rich, his estranged wife, was actually basically recruited by the Mossad to work on Clinton to get this pardon. And the Mossad and the Israeli political figures like Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak, they spared no effort to get a pardon for Mark Rich. So Mark Rich is, very highly connected to the people at the top of the Israeli military and intelligence network.
And then these two guys, Nathan Fruchter and Yehuda Sar, had worked for Mark Rich, and then they're the guys who ran this trading network that led to the World Trade Center steel being sent to China.
Yes, they had originally worked. For Mark Rich in Connecticut. I think in Stamford, Connecticut, he had a company called Clarendon or something like that. And they started in the 90s working for him right out of school. And then they went to Europe and worked with him in Europe for a while. And then in January of 1999, they came back and they were working. They created this international trading division at Huguenot. And this is, obviously the steel was sold then directly to steel companies' mills in China, Korea, and India, all in Asia. And that's very important because the steel had to be disposed of. Now, far away from the United States, far from the prying eyes of any investigators, because the steel showed all kinds of anomalies, that sulfidation, eutectics. The steel had done things that steel would not have done in the absence of extremely high temperatures. Much of the steel was melted. Some of it was vaporized. These are the kinds of things that they didn't want people to see, because we know that thermite was used in the destruction of the World Trade Center, and that, if you add sulfur to the thermite mix, it creates a eutectic so that the steel melts at a much lower temperature.
Right. And there is evidence for extremely high temperatures affecting World Trade Center steel. People can go to the Journal of 9/11 Studies and scroll down a ways, and they'll find the article, evidence for extremely high temperatures, showing that there, as you say, there's evidence that it was actually vaporized. Vaporizing steel. I forget exactly what that temperature is, but it is ridiculously high and far higher than anything that fire could ever do.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's interesting, is that when we talk about this Hugo Noy company, they're a big company now. They do a lot of the recycling of the garbage from New York City. The Hugo Noy company was created by a man named Hugo Noy, who came to the United States in the 1920s, and he was working with a man named Walter M. Rothschild, who also came to the United States. These are all Jews who came from they all came from, this Walter M. Rothschild came from Bonn, and Hugo Noy came from someplace near Bonn or Lübeck or Köln or something like that. And they came with Mino Liesauer. And together they had a company called Associated Metals and Minerals Corporation in New York. And after the war, Hugo Noy started his own company with his own name. Today it's run by his son named Jonathan Noy. The people that were involved in the destruction of the steel from World Trade Center are all related. They work with different companies, but they're all married to the same people. They're all related. Like in his case, his wife is named Kelman, and Kelman was one of the guys that took care of the steel, Bob Kelman. So it's a very small family-run operation, and it's a very tightly run ship. But what's interesting about Hugo Noy is that Hugo Noy, the company, they now try to give this very green impression that they're into recycling. If you go to the Hugo Noy website, you'll see it's all like the rainforest in Puerto Rico or something, all green and luscious and, all heavy-duty green. But what Hugo Noy is doing now, Hugo Noy is a partner with an Israeli Mossad company called Agua Agro, the Agua Agro Fund. And the Agua Agro Fund is very interesting because that's where we get connected with people who are involved in the manufacture of superthermite.
Really? How does that connection work?
Well, the Agua Agro company is headed by a guy named Oren Goffrey. Oren Goffrey is one of them. The people are Israeli, and they have this fund called the Millennium Materials Fund. And in this fund, you see, what the Israelis do is they create these venture capital funds, and with these venture capital funds, they then go and create startup companies and buy little companies that suit them. Now, in the case of the Millennium Materials Fund, one of the founders is Oren Goffrey. It's an Israeli name, Oren Goffrey. And he is the chairman of the Israeli Material and Processes Society. And he created a company in the 1990s. He ran a company in Israel called Chemitas. And it's the largest manufacturer of specialty chemicals in Israel. And it's a partnership with Metalgesellschaft in Germany, Chemital, and Tambour Paints. And this is Tambour Paints is the Israeli company that makes paints. And they created a sub company off of Tambour Paints called Tambour Ecology. And they specialize in making chemicals for metal finishing and surface technology. Now, this is where we talk about the coating. What happened at the World Trade Center on 9/11 is obviously somebody got in there and was able to spray a coating on the floor pans beneath the 220 floors. So when the nanothermite went off, it went off in such a way that it exploded and destroyed the concrete floors, the 4 inches of concrete, created those huge dust clouds. But in order to do that, you had to have somebody in there spraying some sort of metal finishing coating that was disguised, obviously, as some sort of either fireproofing or more likely as a rust-proofing material. And that material was actually the coating that Professor Stephen Jones found in the debris.
Okay, so in that case, this is not necessarily the same kind of shaped nanothermite charges that might have been used to slice the steel columns to take away the vertical support and allow things to come down. But actually, this might have been on the floor pans, blasting the floor pans into smithereens and giving us that very unusual-looking controlled demolition where it looks like a volcano with these pyroclastic clouds going all over the place, dust being blasted upwards and outwards, even way above the zone where the collapse was initiated.
Exactly. There's a lot of people who like to talk about all the various kinds of things that might have been used at the World Trade Center. There's even people who talk about that there were many nukes there. I haven't seen any evidence of that, but the thing is that obviously cutter charges were used because you had